Hi, I'm Robert Ryan O'Neill, and this is my family history spanning across 3 generations. My grandpa Reginald Alfred Cannell was born in Bern, Switzerland on October 22, 1929. In 1955, my grandpa graduated from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich and married my grandma. In 1956, my mother was born, and my grandpa had begun his career as an esteemed engineer. In 1957, my grandpa was recruited to help the U.S. get a man on the moon. My grandpa and mom moved to Washington, D.C., where my grandpa helped design the Lunar Excursion Module. On July 20th, 1969, the Lunar Excursion Module, or the Eagle, landed on the moon. The Apollo 11 had carried Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin to the moon, where they stayed for 21 hours and 31 minutes on the Lunar Excursion Module. My grandpa watched the landing in tears at the Apollo 11 Control Center while his family watched at home from their television. My grandpa and all his co-workers received a presidential commendation for his work on the Apollo 11 mission from President Johnson. And because of this historical feat, America had won the space race and had proven itself better than the USSR. After receiving his commendation, my grandpa left NASA and started working for private industry, where he helped design the epoxy skis and automated bowling scorer. My mother, Alpha Regina Sabina O'Neill, was born in Zurich, Switzerland on October 29, 1956. In 1957, she moved to Washington, D.C. because of her father's work. My mom grew up mostly in Westport, Connecticut, and then attended Columbia University and graduated in 1978. My mom then began a career in marketing movies for many big-time movie studios. In 1986, Warner Brothers Motion Pictures relocated my mom from New York City to Los Angeles, where she helped work on movies like Driving Miss Daisy and Batman. My mom vividly remembers the day that John F. Kennedy died on Friday, November 22, 1963. Her family lived in Washington, D.C., and at the same time her father was working for NASA. My mom was 7 years old and was attending Fernwood Elementary School in Bethesda, Maryland. That day, her mother picked her up from the school instead of riding the bus and went home to watch the terrible event on television. In stunned silence. President Kennedy was a great man in her home because he supported the space program, which had brought them to the U.S. A week later, my mom's family went to pay their respects to John F. Kennedy as he lay in the rotunda at the U.S. Capitol building in Washington, D.C. My mom remembers crying the whole day. In the 1960s and the 1970s, America and Russia were locked in the Cold War with no diplomatic or violent way to end it. However, the Russians and the Americans had begun a series of wars between their differing ideologies of communism and democracy. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, America had strengthened their presence in South Vietnam to combat the aggressive North Vietnamese who were supported by the Russians. The 1970s were the peak of the moments of the war. Both sides had sustained thousands of casualties, and neither side was really gaining any ground. In 1973, America had instated a military draft to support the war cause. One day, as my mom was waiting for acceptance letters from her colleges that she had applied to, she received the draft notice instead. She received the draft notice due to her foreign birth and unusual name. The next day, my mother and grandma went to the draft notice office and had a very humorous time explaining why she wasn't the perfect candidate for war. I was born on September 28, 1995. I grew up in the Pacific Palisades, and I attended a school called Calvary Christian School for 12 years. Growing up, I had seen and experienced the harsh realities of having family members in the World Trade Center on 9/11 and having neighbors and relatives fight in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. However, nothing would strike home more than the Virginia Tech massacre. On April 16, 2007, a lone gunman named Swing Hoi Chow shot and killed 32 people and injured 17 more. On that day, I remember leaving school early and not knowing anything. Searched the news the whole evening. While I was only in 4th grade, I didn't completely understand what would happen, and it would take 4 school assemblies and countless new lockdown drills and heightened security at my school for me to realize the extent of this event. After this event, I had my freedoms in and around school reduced dramatically in our safe little neighborhood of Pacific Palisades. One day when I was in 6th grade, the local bookstore had been robbed at gunpoint, and within minutes my school was surrounded by heavily armed policemen. These events changed my perspective on the world and how dangerous and crazy the world really is.